The winter of 1863 came early to the Colorado Territory, bringing with it a silence so complete it seemed the world itself had frozen solid. Snow fell in thick curtains across the pine-covered mountains, burying the narrow trails that connected the scattered settlements to civilization. In the valley below, the town of Cedar Ridge huddled against the cold, its wooden buildings groaning under the weight of ice and indifference. High above the town, where the air grew thin and the trees grew gnarled from their battle with the wind, stood a solitary cabin. Smoke drifted from its stone chimney, the only sign of life for miles in any direction. The locals called the man who lived there Mad Jack Thornton, though few had seen him close enough to know if madness truly lived behind his weathered face. Jack Thornton was no madman, merely a man who had chosen the mountains over men. At 35, he stood tall and broad-shouldered, his body hardened by years of wrestling a living from the unforgiving wilderness. His dark hair hung past his collar, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face, making his gray eyes seem all the more piercing when they fixed on something. Those eyes had seen too much of what men could do to each other during the war, and so he had retreated to where the only battles were against cold and hunger. Down in Cedar Ridge, the townsfolk spoke of him in whispers and jest. To them, he was a curiosity at best, a wild creature at worst. They saw him perhaps twice a year when he came down to trade furs for supplies, moving through their streets like a ghost from another time. Women clutched their children closer, and men made jokes once his broad back was turned. There goes the mountain hermit, they'd say, more bear than man now. Probably talks to the wolves and thinks they answer back, another would add. And they'd all share a laugh at the expense of a man who asked nothing from them but to be left alone. On this particular December morning, with the snow falling steady and thick, a group of men gathered in Murphy's saloon. The whiskey flowed freely despite the early hour, and with it came the kind of cruelty that often accompanies boredom and drink. "I've got an idea," slurred Tom Garrett, a man whose prosperity in the cattle business had made him bold in all the wrong ways. "You know that crippled woman staying at the boarding house? The one nobody wants?" The others leaned in, sensing sport in the making. They knew who he meant, Sarah Mackenzie, who had arrived in town 3 months prior, seeking work but finding only pity and scorn. An accident on the trail had left her legs useless, and she moved about in a wheeled chair when she moved at all. "What about her?" asked Pete Dawson, already grinning in anticipation. "Well, boys, I think we've found Mad Jack a bride." Tom slapped the bar, roaring with laughter. Think about it. A hermit who can't stand people and a woman who can't walk. Perfect match. The idea took hold like wildfire. In their drunken state, it seemed the height of comedy. They pooled their money to rent a wagon, told the boarding house owner they were taking Sarah to a job opportunity, and loaded her up before she could properly protest. Sarah Mackenzie sat rigid in the back of the wagon, her hands gripping the edges of her chair as it swayed with each bump in the road. At 28, she had once been considered handsome, with auburn hair that caught the light and green eyes that spoke of intelligence and spirit. But months of hardship had dimmed that light, and now she kept her gaze down, having learned that invisibility was safer than notice. She had protested when they came for her, but what could she do? Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house was eager to be rid of a tenant who could barely pay and required extra help. The men had spoken of work at a ranch, and Sarah had allowed herself a moment of hope. But as the wagon climbed higher into the mountains, leaving the last traces of civilization behind, that hope curdled into dread. "Where are you taking me?" she asked for the 3rd time, her voice barely carrying over the creak of wheels and harness. "You'll see soon enough," Tom called back, sharing another laugh with his companions. The journey took hours. The men passed a bottle between them, growing louder and more boisterous as they went. Sarah pulled her thin coat tighter, the cold seeping through despite the blankets they'd thrown over her legs, more to hide them than for comfort, she suspected. Finally, as the afternoon sun struggled through the heavy clouds, they reached a clearing where a cabin sat like a dark stone against the white landscape. Smoke rose from the chimney, and a figure emerged from the door at the sound of their approach. Jack Thornton stood on his porch, rifle in hand but not raised. He recognized Tom Garrett's wagon and felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came with unwanted company. His eyes tracked the group, counting men, assessing threat, before settling on the huddled figure in the back. "Thornton," Tom called out, his voice too loud in the mountain quiet. "We've brought you something." Jack said nothing, waiting. He'd learned long ago that silence often revealed more than questions. The men climbed down, stumbling slightly, and Pete and another man lifted something from the wagon bed. It took Jack a moment to realize they were carrying a woman in a wheeled chair. They set her down roughly in the snow before his porch, and she gripped the arms of the chair to keep from toppling. "We've brought you a wife," Tom announced, gesturing grandly. "Seeing as how you're too peculiar to find one yourself, we thought we'd help. She can't walk, so she can't run away. Perfect for a man who lives like a beast." The laughter that followed was ugly, cutting through the air like rusted blades. Jack's jaw tightened, but his expression remained unreadable. His eyes moved from the men to the woman, taking in her lowered head, her white knuckles, the way she seemed to be trying to disappear into herself. "Consider it a Christmas gift," Pete added. "No charge." Sarah kept her eyes fixed on her lap, tears burning hot trails down her cold cheeks. This was worse than the stares, worse than the whispers, worse than being turned away from job after job. To be given away like a broken piece of furniture, a joke for these men's amusement. It was the final indignity. "That's enough." Jack's voice was quiet, but carried the weight of mountains. "Get off my land. Now. Now. No need to be ungrateful." Tom started, but something in Jack's eyes stopped him. The mountain man had shifted slightly, and though the rifle still pointed at the ground, the threat was clear. "I said get off my land." The men retreated to their wagon, still laughing but with less enthusiasm. As they prepared to leave, Tom called out one more time, "Don't worry, we won't be back for her. She's your problem now." The wagon disappeared down the trail, the sound of their laughter fading until only the wind remained. Jack stood motionless for a long moment, then slowly descended the porch steps. He moved carefully, as one might approach a wounded animal. Sarah heard his footsteps crunching in the snow, stopping a few feet away. She waited for the curse, the complaint, the rough hands that would dump her somewhere to freeze. Instead, there was only silence, stretching out until she finally raised her eyes. Jack Thornton was kneeling in the snow, bringing himself to her eye level, up close. She could see that his eyes were more silver than gray, like winter sky before a storm. There was no mockery in them, no disgust, only a quiet consideration that made her chest tight. "They gave you to me as a joke," he said softly, his voice rough from disuse. "But I see your true beauty." The words were so unexpected, so at odds with everything she'd experienced in the past months, that Sarah could only stare. She searched his face for the lie, the trick, but found only sincerity. I don't understand," she whispered. Jack stood slowly, decision made. "You're cold. Let's get you inside." He moved behind her chair and began pushing it toward the cabin. The wheels caught in the snow, and without hesitation, he lifted both her and the chair, carrying them as easily as he might carry firewood. Sarah gasped, instinctively gripping his coat. "I won't drop you," he said simply, and somehow she believed him. The cabin door opened to warmth and the smell of wood smoke and pine. It was larger than it appeared from outside. With sturdy furniture he had clearly made himself, and pelts covering the floor and walls. He set her down gently near the fire and disappeared into what must be a back room, returning with thick blankets. "Thank you," Sarah managed, though her mind still reeled from the day's events. Jack busied himself with the fire, adding logs until it blazed high. "Are you hungry?" She nodded, suddenly aware that she hadn't eaten since early morning. He moved to a pot hanging near the fire, ladling something that smelled of meat and herbs into a wooden bowl. When he handed it to her, their fingers brushed, and she was surprised to find his touch gentle despite the calluses. As she ate, he settled into a chair across from her, maintaining a respectful distance. The silence between them was different from the hostile quiet of the town. This felt almost peaceful. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why didn't you send me away?" Jack considered the question, his eyes on the fire. "Spent too many years watching men decide who deserves dignity and who doesn't. Seen enough of that to know it's wrong." He looked at her then, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. "Besides, way I see it, we're all broken somehow. Just some of us carry it where it shows." The journey deeper into the mountains tested every ounce of Sarah's remaining strength. Jack had fashioned a makeshift sled from pine branches and rope, securing her chair to it before hitching it to his sturdy mountain horse, a bay mare named Duchess, who seemed unfazed by the additional burden. The path grew narrower as they climbed, winding between ancient pines whose branches drooped under the weight of snow. Sarah clutched the blankets he'd wrapped around her, watching his broad back as he led Duchess through the treacherous terrain. He moved with the sure-footed confidence of a man who knew every rock and root beneath the white blanket of winter. Occasionally, he would glance back, checking on her with those storm-gray eyes that seemed to see too much. The cabin, when it finally appeared through the trees, was smaller than the one near town, but more solidly built. Its logs fitted so tightly that no wind could find purchase between them. A lean-to sheltered split wood along one wall, and smoke already rose from the chimney. He must have banked the fire before leaving that morning. "Home," Jack said simply, the first word he'd spoken in over an hour. The interior was Spartan, but clean, everything in its place with the orderliness of a man who lived by routine. A single room served as kitchen, living space, and bedroom, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. Furs covered much of the floor, and shelves held supplies in neat rows. A narrow bed occupied one corner, covered with a quilt that looked hand-sewn. Jack carried her inside, chair and all, setting her near the fire with the same careful attention he'd shown before. The warmth hit her like a physical thing, making her realize how cold she'd grown during the journey. "I'll heat some water," he said, moving to fill a large pot from a bucket near the door. "You'll want to wash the road dust off." Sarah watched him work, noting the efficiency of his movements. Everything he did seemed deliberate, purposeful. When the water was warm, he poured it into a basin and set it on a low table within her reach, along with a clean cloth and a bar of rough soap that smelled of pine tar. "I'll be outside," he said, already moving toward the door. "Call if you need anything." His consideration for her privacy touched something deep within her. In town, people had treated her as if her infirmity had stripped away her right to dignity. They spoke over her, around her, as if she weren't there. Jack treated her as what she was, a woman deserving of respect. When he returned, she had managed to wash her face and hands, though the effort left her trembling. He took in her exhaustion with a quick glance and moved to the fireplace, where a pot of stew had been warming. "Venison," he explained, ladling generous portions into 2 bowls. "Shot it 3 days ago. Also got potatoes and wild onions." They ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the wind testing the walls outside. The stew was simple but satisfying, flavored with herbs she couldn't identify. "You cook well," she ventured, needing to fill the quiet with something other than her racing thoughts. "Man learns or starves up here." He paused, considering. "Been alone a long time." "How long?" 7 years, give or take. Since the war ended. Sarah knew better than to press about the war. She'd seen enough damaged men returning from those battlefields to recognize the shadows that crossed his face. "And before that?" she asked instead. "Virginia. Had a farm there, small place, nothing left of it now." His voice carried no self-pity, just fact. She wanted to ask more, but sensed the boundary. Instead, she found herself speaking, words tumbling out like water through a broken dam. "I was traveling with my family. We were heading to California. My father had dreams of gold, though we all knew the rush was long over. The wagon overturned crossing a river. Everyone else, they managed to jump clear, but my skirts tangled in the wheel, and when it came down, she gestured helplessly at her legs. The doctor said I was lucky to survive. I'm not sure he was right. Jack set down his bowl and looked at her directly. You're alive. That's always better than the alternative. Is it? The bitterness in her voice surprised them both. I'm 28 years old. Mr. Thornton. I was to be married once, but that ended when this happened. My family continued west without me, said they'd send for me when they got settled. But that was 8 months ago. I've been surviving on charity and the few coins I earned doing mending, until even that work dried up. And now I'm here, forced on a stranger as a cruel joke. So tell me, what exactly should I be grateful for? The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Jack seemed to be weighing his words carefully. Gratitude's not what I meant, he finally said. Just that being alive means things can still change. Dead is permanent. Sarah felt tears threaten again and turned her face toward the fire. I'm sorry. You've been nothing but kind, and here I am feeling sorry for myself. You've got cause. He stood, collecting their bowls. Been dealt a hard hand, no shame in acknowledging it. As he cleaned the dishes in a bucket of water, Sarah studied the cabin more closely. Despite its simple furnishings, there were touches that suggested more than mere survival. Books on a shelf, a chess set carved from light and dark wood, even what looked like pencil sketches tacked to one wall. You draw? She asked, surprised. He glanced at the sketches, looking almost embarrassed. Passes the time in winter, just mountains and trees, mostly, nothing special. But they were special. She could see that even from across the room. There was a delicate quality to the lines that seemed at odds with his rough hands and weathered face. The wind picked up outside, howling through the trees like a living thing. Jack added more wood to the fire, then stood awkwardly, clearly wrestling with something. There's only the one bed, he said finally. You take it. I'll make do by the fire. I couldn't, not up for debate. His tone was firm but not unkind. I've slept on worse than a floor. You need proper rest. He helped her from the chair to the bed, his hands steady and impersonal as a doctor's. The mattress was filled with pine needles and gave off a fresh, clean scent. He pulled the quilt up to her chin, then stepped back quickly. Chamber pot's under the bed if you need it, he said, color rising slightly above his beard. I'll help you in the morning if you require assistance. The delicacy with which he addressed such practical matters made her throat tight. Thank you, Mr. Thornton. Jack, he corrected. Just Jack. He settled by the fire with a buffalo robe, his back to her, offering what privacy the small space allowed. Sarah lay in the darkness, listening to the wind and trying to make sense of the day. This morning she had woken in a cold boarding house, unwanted and alone. Tonight she lay in a warm bed, treated with more kindness than she'd known in months, by a man others called mad. Jack, she called softly. Why do you really live up here alone? For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, his voice was so quiet she had to strain to hear it. Got tired of pretending people make sense. Animals, weather, mountains. They're honest, harsh sometimes, but honest. Man knows where he stands. And people, he paused. People will smile while they twist the knife. Call it civilization. But I've seen more humanity in a wolf pack than a town council. Sarah thought of the men who'd brought her here, laughing at their clever joke. I think I understand. Get some sleep, he said gently. Tomorrow we'll be here soon enough. But sleep wouldn't come. Her mind raced with questions and fears. What would happen when the novelty wore off? When he tired of having a burden in his home? She'd learned not to trust kindness. It too often came with a price. You're thinking too loud, Jack said from his place by the fire. Despite everything, she almost smiled. Sorry, don't apologize. Just, you're safe here. Whatever else you're worrying about can wait until daylight. Why should I trust you? The question slipped out before she could stop it. He was quiet for a moment. No reason you should. Trust is earned, not asked for. But I'll tell you this. I've got no use for cruelty. Seen too much of it to add more to the world. Sarah pulled the quilt higher, breathing in the scent of pine and smoke. Outside, wolves howled in the distance, a lonely sound that seemed to echo the ache in her chest. But inside, the fire crackled warmly, and for the first time in months, she wasn't cold. "Good night, Jack," she whispered. "Good night, Sarah." In the darkness, she allowed herself to believe, just for tonight, that maybe the world still held surprises that weren't cruel, that kindness could exist without condition. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, she was warm and safe and treated like a human being. It was enough. For now, it was enough. The first week tested them both in ways neither had anticipated. Sarah woke each morning to find Jack already up, the fire blazing and coffee brewing. He would help her from the bed to her chair with a matter-of-fact efficiency that somehow preserved her dignity, then busy himself with breakfast while she attended to her personal needs as best she could. The humiliation of requiring help for the simplest tasks burned like acid in her throat. She had always prided herself on her independence, and now she couldn't even reach the water bucket without assistance. Jack never showed impatience, but she saw the disruption she caused to his ordered life. The extra time everything took, the rearranging of furniture to accommodate her chair, the constant awareness of another person in his carefully solitary space. "I can manage," she insisted on the fourth morning, trying to transfer from the bed to her chair alone. Her arms shook with the effort, and she nearly fell, catching herself at the last moment. Jack was there instantly, steadying her with hands that were gentle despite their strength. "No shame in accepting help," he said quietly. "There's nothing but shame in it," she shot back, hating the tears that threatened. "I'm nothing but a burden to you." He stepped back once she was settled, his gray eyes thoughtful. "Burden's a heavy word. Seen men carry their wounded brothers for miles through mud and blood. Never heard them complain about burdens. That's different. Those men chose—" "Did they?" He moved to pour coffee, his back to her. "War doesn't ask what you choose. Neither does life. We just do what needs doing." After breakfast, he surprised her by producing a leather-bound ledger and a handful of pencils. "Noticed you watching me sketch. Thought you might want something to occupy your hands." Sarah took the materials, touched by the gesture. "I used to draw before." She gestured vaguely at her legs. "Haven't tried since." "Hands still work fine," he observed. "Rest is just excuses." His bluntness should have stung, but somehow it felt more honest than the pitying looks she'd grown accustomed to. She opened the ledger, finding it empty save for a few pages of neat handwriting, supply lists and weather observations in Jack's careful script. While he went about his daily tasks, checking trap lines, splitting wood, tending to Duchess, Sarah struggled with the pencil. Her first attempts were shaky, her hands out of practice, but as the hours passed, muscle memory returned. She found herself sketching the view from the window, snow-laden pines, the distant peaks, the way smoke from the chimney painted patterns against the sky. Jack returned at midday to find her so absorbed she didn't hear him enter. He stood quietly in the doorway, snow still dusting his shoulders, watching her work. When she finally looked up, startled, he merely nodded at the sketch. "That's fine work, better than mine." Heat rose in her cheeks. It's good," he said firmly. "Don't diminish it." As the days passed, they developed a routine. Jack would help her with necessities in the morning, then leave her with tasks she could manage, mending his clothes, preparing vegetables for their meals, keeping the fire fed. He never made her feel like she was earning her keep, but the ability to contribute eased something tight in her chest. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sometimes talking, often just sharing the comfortable silence. Jack would work on maintaining his equipment or carve something from wood, while Sarah sketched or read from his small collection of books. "You're educated," she observed one night, looking up from a well-worn copy of Shakespeare's sonnets. "My mother was a schoolteacher," he said, not looking up from the trap he was repairing. "Insisted all her children learn their letters. Said education was the only thing that couldn't be taken away." Was. Died when I was 15. Fever took her. Sarah wanted to ask about his father, his siblings, but something in the set of his shoulders warned her off. Instead, she read aloud, her voice filling the cabin with words of love and loss written centuries ago but still achingly relevant. The second week brought a blizzard that trapped them inside for 3 days. The world outside disappeared in a white fury that rattled the windows and sent drafts through every tiny gap. Jack kept the fire roaring, but still the cold crept in. On the second night of the storm, Sarah woke shivering to find her blankets weren't enough. She tried to be still, not wanting to disturb Jack, but her teeth chattered audibly. She heard him stir by the fire, then his footsteps approaching. Without a word, he draped his buffalo robe over her, adding its weight to her blankets. "You'll freeze," she protested through chattering teeth. "I'm used to it." He stoked the fire higher, then surprised her by pulling his chair closer to the bed. "Body heat helps. Do you mind?" She shook her head, too cold to worry about propriety. He settled in the chair, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Gradually, her shivering eased. "Tell me about Virginia," she said softly, needing to fill the intimate darkness with words. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, green. So green it hurt to look at sometimes. Mountains there are older, gentler, rounded like sleeping women, had 40 acres along a creek, good soil, grew corn, some tobacco, had plans to build a bigger house when I married. Her name was Elizabeth, lived on the next farm over. We'd known each other since we were children." Sarah's heart constricted. "What happened?" "War happened. I joined up in 61, like most fools. Thought it'd be over by Christmas. Elizabeth promised to wait. She did, just not the way either of us expected." He fell silent, and Sarah didn't push. Some stories had to come in their own time. "Came home on leave in 63, he finally continued. "Found the farms burned, courtesy of some cavalry raid. Elizabeth. They said she tried to save her father's horses. Barn collapsed. Jack, I'm so sorry. Went back to the war after that. Didn't much care what happened. When it ended, couldn't stay in Virginia. Too many ghosts. Headed west like everyone else, looking to forget." They sat in the darkness, listening to the storm rage outside. Sarah reached out tentatively, finding his hand where it rested on the arm of the chair. He didn't pull away. "Is that why you stay up here? To forget? Started that way. Now." He turned his hand, entwining their fingers carefully. "Now it's just home. Man can't run forever." "Eventually you have to stop and build something, even if it's just a life alone. You're not alone now," she said without thinking, then froze. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to presume." His thumb brushed across her knuckles, the lightest touch. "No, you're right. I'm not alone now. Question is what to do about it." The storm broke the next morning, leaving the world transformed. Drifts reached halfway up the windows, and tree branches bowed under the weight of snow. Jack spent hours digging them out, creating paths to the woodpile and privy. Sarah watched from the window, noting how he favored his left shoulder. When he came in, she had hot coffee ready and had warmed some liniment by the fire. "Shoulder's bothering you," she said. It wasn't a question. He looked surprised. "Old injury, acts up in the cold. Sit." She gestured to the floor by her chair. When he hesitated, she added, "You've been caring for me for 2 weeks. Let me return the favor where I can." He settled on the floor, and she worked the warm liniment into his shoulder, feeling the knotted muscles slowly relax under her hands. It was the first time she'd touched him deliberately, and she was acutely aware of the warmth of his skin through his shirt, the way he gradually leaned into her touch. "You have healing hands," he murmured. "My mother was a midwife. Taught me some things." She worked in silence for a moment, then asked, "What will the town think? When they realize you kept me?" His shoulders tensed again. "Let them think what they want. Their opinions don't reach up here. But when you need supplies, Sarah, he turned to look up at her, his gray eyes serious. I stopped caring what people think the day I found Elizabeth. They can say what they want. Won't change anything. She wanted to ask what exactly wouldn't change, what this arrangement between them was becoming. But fear held her tongue. Some questions, once asked, couldn't be taken back. That night, as they settled into their respective spaces, she in the bed, he by the fire, Sarah found herself missing the warmth of his presence nearby. The cabin felt too large, the distance between them too great. "Jack," she called softly. Thank you for everything." She heard him shift, could picture him staring into the fire. "No need for thanks. We're just two people trying to survive winter, nothing more complicated than that." But they both knew it was already more complicated. Every shared meal, every quiet evening, every small kindness was weaving something between them, fragile as frost patterns on glass, but growing stronger with each passing day. Outside, wolves howled in the distance, their calls echoing off the mountains. Inside, the fire crackled and settled, and two lonely people lay awake in the darkness, each pretending they weren't thinking of the other. The worst storm of the winter arrived in late January, a howling beast that seemed determined to tear the cabin from its foundations. For 2 days, the snow fell so thick that Jack couldn't venture more than a few feet from the door. Their woodpile, thankfully close to the cabin, became their lifeline as the temperature plummeted to depths that made breathing painful. On the second night, the weight of snow on the roof grew concerning. Sarah watched Jack's face tighten each time the beams creaked overhead. He'd built well, but nature had ways of humbling even the best construction. "How bad is it?" she asked, setting aside her sewing. He looked up from where he was reinforcing the door with additional boards. "Roof's holding, but if this keeps up—" He didn't finish, but she understood. They both knew what a collapsed roof meant in weather like this. Around midnight, a sharp crack echoed through the cabin. Jack was on his feet instantly. Grabbing a lantern, "Stay here," he commanded, already pulling on his coat. "Jack, no!" But he was gone, the door slamming shut behind him. Sarah sat rigid in her chair, straining to hear over the wind. Long minutes passed. She heard scrambling on the roof, the scrape of a shovel, muffled curses when something went wrong. Then silence. "Jack!" she called out, her voice swallowed by the storm. More silence. Panic clawed at her throat. She looked at the door, then at her useless legs. For months, she'd accepted her limitations, but now, with Jack possibly hurt or worse, rage flooded through her. She gripped the arms of her chair and pushed herself up, balancing on trembling arms. The first attempt to move toward the door sent her crashing to the floor. Pain shot through her hip, but she dragged herself forward, using the furniture for support. Every inch was agony, her legs dead weight that tangled and hindered, but she kept going. She had just reached the door when it burst open. Jack stumbled in, covered in snow, his face tight with exhaustion. He stopped short at the sight of her on the floor. "Sarah, what? I thought you were hurt," she gasped, embarrassment flooding through her now that he was safe. "I couldn't just sit." He dropped to his knees beside her, his cold hands surprisingly gentle as he checked for injury. "You brave, foolish woman," he murmured, and she wasn't sure if it was admiration or admonishment in his voice. He lifted her carefully, carrying her not to her chair but to his own by the fire. Then he surprised her by kneeling at her feet, running his hands carefully along her legs, checking for breaks or swelling from her fall. "Can you feel this?" he asked, pressing gently. "No," she whispered, hating the word. His hands stilled, then, with infinite care, he removed her shoes and began rubbing her feet, trying to ensure circulation despite the lack of sensation. The intimacy of the gesture made her breath catch. "The roof?" she asked, needing to break the spell. "Cleared enough snow to buy us time. We'll need more work come morning." He didn't look up from his task. "You could have hurt yourself badly. I couldn't just sit here while you might be—" She stopped, unable to voice the fear that had driven her to the floor. His hands paused. When he looked up, something raw flickered in his gray eyes. "Been a long time since anyone worried about me." "Well," she said, trying for lightness despite her racing heart. "Someone has to. You take too many risks." A smile tugged at his beard. "Pot calling the kettle black, seems to me." He settled her back in her chair, then pulled his own close, collapsing into it with exhaustion he rarely showed. Without thinking, Sarah reached out and brushed snow from his hair. He went still under her touch, and she started to pull back, but he caught her hand. "Don't," he said softly. "Please." They sat that way, her hand in his, while the storm raged outside. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and Sarah felt something shift between them, fundamental as the seasons changing. The next morning brought clear skies and brutal cold. Jack was out early, properly clearing the roof and checking for damage. Sarah watched from the window as he worked, noting the careful way he moved. The night's exertions had taken their toll. When he came in for the midday meal, she had hot stew waiting and had warmed his dry clothes by the fire. He changed without comment, but she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" she finally asked. "You're different than when you arrived," he said. "Stronger." She laughed, but it was bitter. "Stronger? I crawled across the floor like an animal last night. You thought I was in trouble and you acted." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Do you know how many people would have sat in that chair and waited? Most, but not you. Fat lot of good it did. If you had been hurt, but I wasn't, and you tried." He stood abruptly, moving to the window. "Spring will come in a few months. Snow will melt. Trails will clear." Her heart stuttered. Do you want me to leave?" He turned, and she saw something like pain flash across his features. "Want? No. But what I want and what's right. Don't." The word came out sharper than she intended. "Don't you dare decide what's right for me. I've had enough of people making my choices. Sarah, no." She gripped the arms of her chair. "Everyone's decided what I can't do, where I can't go, what I can't be. You're the first person to just let me be human. Don't start treating me like broken goods now." He crossed to her in 3 strides, kneeling before her chair. "You're not broken goods. You're the strongest person I know." "Then why talk of spring, of leaving?" His hands covered hers where they gripped the chair. "Because you deserve better than a half-wild hermit in a cabin. You deserve a real life, a real home." "This is real," she interrupted. "This is the most real thing I've felt in years. Unless you don't feel—" He silenced her with a kiss, sudden and desperate. His beard was rough against her skin. His lips chapped from the cold, and it was perfect. When he pulled back, they were both breathing hard. "I feel too much," he said roughly. "That's the problem. You came here as a cruel joke, and I can't bear the thought of you staying for the wrong reasons. Out of gratitude or lack of options. Jack Thornton, you listen to me." She framed his face with her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "I'm here because nowhere else makes sense anymore. Not because I have to be, but because I want to be. With you, if you'll have me." He turned his face into her palm, pressing a kiss there. "If I'll have you, woman, I'd fight the whole mountain to keep you. Then stop trying to noble yourself out of this. We both know life's too short and too hard for that nonsense." He laughed then, a rusty sound that seemed to surprise him. Practical to the bone. Someone has to be. That night, the temperature dropped so low that even the generous fire couldn't keep the cabin warm. Sarah woke shivering again, but before she could even sit up, Jack was there. "This is foolishness," he said. "Move over." "What?" "We're both freezing for the sake of propriety that doesn't even exist up here. Move over." Heart hammering. She shifted in the narrow bed. Jack slid in beside her, fully clothed, pulling the buffalo robe over them both. The heat of him was like a furnace, and she couldn't help but sigh in relief. "Better?" he asked, his breath warm against her hair. "Yes." She hesitated, then rolled to face him. In the dim light, his eyes were silver. Are we? We're two people trying not to freeze, he said, but his arm came around her, pulling her against his chest. Rest of it we'll figure out come spring. Always so practical, she murmured against his shirt. One of us has to be. He echoed her earlier words, and she felt him smile. She fell asleep to the steady beat of his heart, the howl of the wind no longer threatening but merely the sound of the world outside their small, warm space. In the morning, there would be water to haul and wood to split, meals to cook and paths to clear. But for now, in the depth of winter's grip, they had found something neither had dared hope for, not just survival, but warmth that went beyond the physical. The storm passed, leaving crystal skies and snow that sparkled like diamonds in the sun. But inside the cabin, the greater storm, the one that had raged in two lonely hearts, had finally found its calm. The first green shoots of spring emerged in late March, pushing through the melting snow with a determination that Sarah found personally inspiring. She sat on the cabin's small porch in her chair, a shawl around her shoulders, watching Jack work the soil for their garden. The wheeled chair he'd built for her over the winter months made movement easier, its wider wheels and sturdy construction allowing her to navigate the rough ground around their home. "Potatoes here," Jack called out, marking rows with string. "Carrots there. What else?" "Beans," she suggested. "And perhaps some squash near the edge?" He nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. The physical work brought color to his face, made him look younger than his years. These past months had changed him too. The sharp edges of his solitude had softened, though the wariness never fully left his eyes. Sarah had her own work spread on the small table Jack had built to attach to her chair. She was piecing together a quilt from scraps of their old clothing, anything too worn to mend further. Her fingers, strengthened by months of constant use, moved surely across the fabric. The peace of the morning was broken by the sound of horses on the trail. Jack straightened, instantly alert, his hand moving reflexively toward where his rifle leaned against the cabin wall. They'd had no visitors since her arrival, and the tension in his shoulders told her he expected no good from this intrusion. 3 riders emerged from the tree line, Tom Garrett and 2 others from town. Sarah's stomach clenched as she recognized them, the memory of that December day flooding back. Jack moved to stand between her and the approaching men, a quiet but unmistakable protective gesture. "Thornton," Tom called out, reining in his horse at a respectful distance. His eyes found Sarah, widened slightly. "Well, I'll be damned. You actually kept her. State your business." "Garrett." Jack's voice was flat, dangerous. Tom dismounted, his companions following suit. He'd been drinking. Sarah could see it in the loose way he moved, the red in his face. "Just wanted to see how our little joke turned out. Boys here didn't believe me when I said Mad Jack took himself a crippled bride. You need to leave." Jack's hand rested on his rifle now, not pointing it but making his readiness clear. Now, no need for hostility." Tom stepped closer, his eyes on Sarah. "How about it? Woman, he treating you right, or are you ready to come back to civilization?" Sarah lifted her chin. "I'm exactly where I choose to be, Mr. Garrett." Tom laughed, ugly and disbelieving. "Choose? You can't even walk. What choice do you have?" "More choice than you'll ever understand," she replied coldly. "Now, as Jack said, you need to leave." One of Tom's companions, younger and clearly uncomfortable, tugged at his arm. "Come on, Tom. We've seen what we came to see." But Tom shrugged him off, alcohol making him bold. "I don't think you understand the situation, Thornton. See, we figured by now you'd be tired of playing nursemaid. Thought we'd take her off your hands, maybe find her a place at the saloon. May's always looking for girls, even ones who can't—" The rest of his words were cut off as Jack moved, faster than Sarah had ever seen him move. His fist connected with Tom's jaw, sending the man sprawling in the mud. The other 2 men reached for their guns but froze as Jack's rifle swung up, steady and sure. "You dare!" Jack's voice was barely human. more growl than words. "You dare come to my home and insult my woman?" Tom struggled to his feet, blood dripping from his mouth. "Your woman? She's nothing but a burden you're too stupid to drop." Jack cocked the rifle. "Sarah is going to go inside now. You're going to get on your horses and ride away. If I see any of you on my land again, I won't waste words." "Jack," Sarah said softly. He didn't look at her, but she saw the muscle in his jaw twitch. "I'll make coffee." She wheeled herself inside, but positioned herself near the window where she could watch. The standoff lasted another minute before Tom's companions convinced him to mount up. As they rode away, Tom shouted back, "This isn't over, Thornton. You can't hide up here forever." Jack stood watching until they were out of sight, then slowly lowered his rifle when he finally came inside. Sarah had coffee ready and a damp cloth for his split knuckles. "Shouldn't have hit him," he said as she tended his hand. "Felt good, though, didn't it?" She kept her tone light, but her hands trembled slightly. He caught them, stilling their movement. "They won't let this go. Tom Garrett's not the type to forget being knocked down. Then we'll deal with whatever comes." She met his eyes. Together, his expression softened. "When did you get so fierce?" "I had a good teacher." That night, Jack was restless. He checked and rechecked the doors, cleaned weapons that were already spotless. Sarah finally called him to sit beside her near the fire. "Talk to me," she said. "What's really bothering you?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I've been alone so long. I forgot what it means to have something to lose. Jack, if they come back, if they try to take you..." His hands clenched. "I've done things. Sarah, in the war, things that changed me. I thought I'd left that man behind, but today..." She took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "You defended us. That's all. The man you are isn't defined by one moment of violence, but by all the moments of kindness, and I've seen more of those than I can count." He pulled her against him, careful as always of her limitations, and she felt him tremble. "I can't lose you," he whispered into her hair. "You won't," she promised, though they both knew the world had ways of breaking such promises. The next week passed peacefully. They worked their garden. Jack hunted while Sarah preserved meat and prepared hides. In the evenings, she taught him to play chess properly. He knew the moves, but had little strategy. He taught her to identify bird calls and animal tracks, knowledge that made the forest around them come alive with hidden activity. One afternoon, as Sarah worked on her quilt in the sunshine, she heard singing, a woman's voice, coming up the trail. Jack emerged from the cabin, rifle in hand but lowered, as curious as she was. The singer came into view, a sturdy woman in her 50s, leading a mule loaded with supplies. She had steel gray hair pinned severely back and wore men's clothing, practical for the mountain trails. "Hello, the house," she called out cheerfully. "Martha Washington come calling, though most folks call me Granny Wash on account of the name being too fancy for these parts." Jack relaxed marginally. "Ma'am, you're far from the usual trails." "That I am. Young man. Heard there was folks up here might need supplies. I run goods to the mining camps. Figured I'd expand my route." Her sharp eyes found Sarah, took in the chair and the quilting, and her smile widened. "Well now, aren't you a sight for sore eyes? Been too long since I had another woman to talk with." Sarah found herself smiling back. "Would you like some coffee? And please, call me Sarah." "Don't mind if I do." Granny Wash proved to be a font of information and gossip. As they shared coffee and the biscuits Sarah had made that morning, she regaled them with news from the mining camps and settlements. "Heard about the fuss in Cedar Ridge," she said casually, eyes twinkling. "Tom Garrett's been nursing a mighty sore jaw and an even sorer pride. Course, most folks think he had it coming. That man's been a bully since he was in short pants." "Most folks?" Jack asked carefully. "Oh, there's always some who side with whoever's buying drinks. But plenty remember how he used to treat his first wife. God rest her soul. And what he and his boys did, bringing Miss Sarah here as some kind of joke." She shook her head. "Well, Let's just say there's more than a few women in town who think you did right. Mr. Thornton. She stayed for dinner, entertaining them with stories and accepting Sarah's offer to mend a tear in her pack. As she prepared to leave, she pressed a small package into Sarah's hands. Seeds, she explained. Flowers. Man needs vegetables to live, but a woman needs beauty to thrive. Plant these around your door come full spring. Thank you. Sarah blinked back sudden tears at the kindness. I'll be back through in a month, Granny Wash announced. Anything you need from town, you just let me know. And Miss Sarah, if you've got any of that quilting to sell, I know folks who'd pay good money for work that fine. After she left, Jack stood looking down the trail thoughtfully. First visitor in 7 years who didn't make me want to reach for my gun. She's wonderful. Sarah agreed. And did you hear? My quilting could bring in money. I could contribute. You contribute plenty, Jack interrupted. But he was smiling. Though I won't say no to extra coffee and sugar if your quilts can buy them. That night, as they lay in their now shared bed, Sarah traced patterns on Jack's chest through his shirt. Do you think we could be happy? Truly happy? He caught her hand, brought it to his lips. Thought I was done with happiness when I lost Elizabeth. Figured contentment was the best a man like me could hope for. But this? He gestured to encompass the cabin. Their life, her presence beside him. This is more than happiness. This is peace. Even with Tom Garrett making threats? Let him threaten. I've got everything worth protecting right here. He pulled her closer. And I'll be damned if anyone takes it away. Outside, an owl called, and its mate answered from across the valley. Sarah smiled against Jack's shoulder, thinking of Granny Wash's flower seeds, of the quilt growing under her hands, of the garden taking shape outside their door. Life was blooming around them as surely as the mountain spring, fragile and precious and worth every fight to preserve it. The letter arrived with Granny Wash on her May visit, carried up from town along with supplies and gossip. Sarah recognized the handwriting immediately, though she hadn't seen it in over a year. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. My folks, she said to Jack's questioning look. From California. She read in silence while Jack busied himself helping Granny Wash unload supplies. Though Sarah knew he was giving her privacy more than anything, the older woman picked up on the tension immediately. I'll just water my mule, Granny Wash announced tactfully. Take my time about it. When they were alone, Sarah set the letter aside, her face pale. Jack came to her immediately, kneeling beside her chair. What is it? They're coming. Her voice was hollow. My parents, they heard about where I am. They say they're coming to rescue me from my unfortunate circumstances. Jack's jaw tightened. When? Within the month. My father's business in California has done well. They have money now, enough to provide proper care for me. She laughed bitterly. 8 months of silence, and now they want to play concerned parents. What do you want to do? She looked at him in surprise. What do I want? Jack, I want to stay here. This is my home. You're my... Your what? He asked softly when she trailed off. Everything. She finished simply. You're my everything. He caught her hands, held them tight. Then you'll stay. We'll face them together. But as the days passed, Sarah's anxiety grew. She knew her parents, especially her father. James Mackenzie was a man who believed he knew best for everyone, particularly his children. He'd left her in Cedar Ridge because she was an inconvenience to his California dreams. Now that those dreams had borne fruit, he'd want to manage her life again, to put her somewhere appropriate, likely some institution where she'd be cared for but never truly live. You're going to wear a hole in that fabric, Jack observed one evening, watching her savage stitching on her latest quilt. She set the work aside with a sigh. I keep thinking about what they'll see. Their crippled daughter living in a cabin with a man who isn't her husband, depending on his charity. Is that what you think this is? Charity. No, but then why do you care what they think? He moved from his own chair to sit on the floor beside hers, a habit he'd developed over the months. "Sarah, you're not some burden I took in. You're the woman I love." The words hung in the air between them. He'd never said them before, not directly. Sarah's breath caught. You love me?" "Course I do. Thought that was obvious." He looked almost embarrassed. "Not much good with words, but yes, I love you. Have for months now." "Jack Thornton," she breathed, reaching for him. "You impossible. Wonderful man." He kissed her then, deep and sure. And for a moment, all her worries faded. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said suddenly. "Before they come, take away their biggest argument. Jack, I know it's not much of a proposal. Don't have a ring or fancy words, but I've got strong hands and a true heart. I'll spend every day making sure you never regret it." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, of course, yes." They were married 3 days later, Granny Wash serving as witness and the circuit preacher who served the mining camps performing the ceremony. It was simple. Sarah wore her best dress, blue cotton she'd mended and improved over the winter, with wildflowers Jack had picked woven into her hair. Jack wore his cleanest shirt and had even trimmed his beard for the occasion. "Do you, Jackson Samuel Thornton, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the preacher intoned. "I do," Jack said firmly, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. "And do you, Sarah Ann Mackenzie, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," she whispered, then louder, "I do. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I pronounce you man and wife." Jack kissed her with a tenderness that made Granny Wash dab at her eyes. "Now let them try to take you," he murmured against her lips. They had a week of quiet happiness before the storm arrived. Sarah was working in the garden, able to tend the lower plants from her chair, when she heard the horses, multiple horses moving fast. Jack emerged from the cabin immediately, rifle in hand but held low. 4 riders came into view, her parents, accompanied by Tom Garrett and another man from town. Sarah's heart sank. Of course Tom would involve himself, seeing an opportunity to cause trouble. Sarah, her mother, Margaret Mackenzie, dismounted first, rushing forward. She stopped short at the sight of her daughter, taking in the wheeled chair, the garden soil on her hands, the simple clothes. "Oh, my dear girl, what has become of you?" "Hello, Mother." Sarah kept her voice steady. "Father." James Mackenzie dismounted more slowly, his face hard as granite. He was a man who'd aged well, silver at his temples lending him distinction. His clothes spoke of prosperity, fine wool and polished boots. Sarah, his eyes moved to Jack, dismissed him, then returned to his daughter. "We've come to take you home." "I am home," Sarah replied. "This?" Her father gestured at the cabin, his voice dripping disdain. "This hovel, living with a man who's not your husband, dependent on charity." "He is my husband," Sarah said clearly. "We were married a week ago, and this is our home, built by our hands, sustained by our work." The silence that followed was deafening. Tom Garrett's smirk widened, enjoying the drama. Margaret Mackenzie swayed slightly, hand to her throat. "Married?" James's voice was dangerously quiet. "To this mountain savage?" Jack stepped forward then, placing himself slightly in front of Sarah's chair. "Mr. Mackenzie, ma'am, I understand your concern for your daughter, but she's made her choice, and I'll spend my life making sure she doesn't regret it." "You understand nothing," James snapped. "She's not capable of making such choices. Look at her. She's helpless, dependent, in need of proper medical care and supervision." "I'm right here," Sarah said sharply. "And perfectly capable of speaking for myself. Yes, I can't walk." "That hasn't changed since you left me in Cedar Ridge. What has changed is that I've found someone who sees me as a whole person, not a burden to be managed." "Sarah, be reasonable," her mother pleaded. "We have money now. We can get you proper doctors, nurses, a comfortable life. In an institution, Sarah finished. Somewhere out of sight, where I won't embarrass you with my limitations. That's not, isn't it? Sarah's voice rose. Where were you for 8 months? Mother? When I was surviving on charity in that boarding house. When these men brought me here as a joke? You were building your comfortable life in California, free of the burden of a crippled daughter. How dare you? James started forward, but Jack's rifle shifted slightly, not quite pointing but making its presence known. That's close enough, Jack said quietly. Tom Garrett chose that moment to speak up. See, Mr. Mackenzie, the man's unstable, violent. Just last month he attacked me without provocation. Your daughter's not safe here. Without provocation? Sarah laughed, sharp and bitter. You brought me here like I was livestock. Payment for a joke. You suggested I could work in the saloon. Jack defended my honor, something my own family never bothered to do. Margaret was crying now, quiet tears sliding down her cheeks. We only wanted what was best for you. No, Sarah said firmly. You wanted what was easiest for you. Jack wants what's best for me. He built this chair so I could move freely. He adjusted our home so I could contribute. He sees my worth, not my limitations. And what happens when he tires of playing nursemaid? James demanded. When the novelty wears off, you'll be truly alone then, with no family to turn to. Jack spoke then, his voice carrying the quiet authority of absolute certainty. I lost everything once. My home, my family. The woman I planned to marry came up here to die slowly, if I'm honest. Then your daughter arrived, and I learned something. Life's not about what you lose. It's about what you choose to build after. Sarah and I are building something real here. It may not look like much to you, but it's honest and true, and ours. Pretty words, Tom sneered. But we all know what this really is, a man taking advantage of a woman with no options. Jack moved so fast Tom barely had time to react. The rifle was against his chest. Jack's face inches from his. Say one more word about my wife, Jack said softly, and you'll be picking your teeth out of the dirt. Again. Jack, Sarah called. He's not worth it. Jack stepped back slowly, but Tom had paled, remembering their last encounter. James Mackenzie looked between his daughter and Jack, something shifting in his expression. You truly wish to stay here? With every fiber of my being. Sarah replied. He was quiet for a long moment, then nodded once, sharp and final. Then you've made your choice. Don't expect... James, Margaret interrupted, her voice stronger than Sarah had ever heard it. Enough. Everyone turned to stare at her. She moved past her husband to kneel beside Sarah's chair, taking her daughter's hands. I failed you, she said simply. We both did. I let my fear of hardship override my duty as your mother. I won't compound that failure by trying to force you from a place where you've clearly found happiness. She looked up at Jack. Will you take care of her? With my life, he answered without hesitation. Margaret squeezed Sarah's hands once more, then rose. Then I suppose we should go. Margaret, James protested. No, James, we've done enough damage. She moved toward her horse, then paused. Sarah, might I write, now that I know where you are? Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. I'd like that. The departure was awkward. Tom Garrett still muttering threats until James told him sharply to shut up. As they rode away, Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions, relief, sadness, anger, and a strange sense of freedom. Jack's hand settled on her shoulder, warm and solid. You all right? I think so. She covered his hand with hers. That was harder than I expected. Family always is. He squeezed gently. But you've got a new family now. Small one, just us two, but it's yours. Ours, she corrected, and felt him smile. That night, as they lay together, Sarah said quietly, Thank you for standing up to them, for standing up for us. Always will, he murmured against her hair. That's what love does. It stands up and fights, even when the odds are against it. She thought of her parents, riding back to their comfortable life. and found she felt more pity than anger. They would never understand what she'd found here. A love that saw past surfaces to the truth beneath. A partnership built on mutual respect and genuine care. "No regrets?" Jack asked. "Not one," she answered, and meant it. The smell of smoke woke Sarah from a dead sleep. For a moment, she thought it was the fireplace, but the acrid scent was wrong, too chemical, too sharp. Then she heard Jack's voice, urgent and commanding. "Sarah, wake up!" Her eyes flew open to see an orange glow dancing on the cabin walls. Not from their fireplace, from outside. Jack was already dressed, shoving her clothes at her. "Fire!" he said tersely. "Get dressed, quick!" Her hands shook as she pulled on her dress over her nightgown. Outside, she could hear crackling and the terrible sound of flames eating wood. Jack lifted her into her chair and pushed her toward the door, grabbing his rifle and their small strongbox of money. The sight that greeted them stole her breath. The lean-to where they stored wood was fully engulfed, flames licking toward the cabin roof. Worse, she could see riders by the tree line, dark shapes against the fire's light. "Tom Garrett," Jack growled. "Should have known he wouldn't let it go." "The cabin," Sarah started. "Leave it." Jack's voice was grim. "We need to get you safe." But even as he spoke, burning debris from the lean-to caught the cabin's roof. The dry summer had made everything tinder-ready, and the flames spread with terrifying speed. "Our home," Sarah whispered, watching months of work begin to disappear. Jack knelt beside her chair. "Listen to me. They're waiting to see what we do, probably hoping to grab you in the confusion. We're going to head for the root cellar, then circle around to the woods. Can you hold on if I carry you?" She nodded, wrapping her arms around his neck as he lifted her. Behind them, their cabin, their sanctuary, became a torch in the night. They made it to the root cellar, a small dugout built into the hillside for storing preserves. Jack settled her inside and handed her his pistol. "If anyone but me comes through that door, you shoot. Don't hesitate." "Where are you going?" "To end this." His face was stone in the firelight. "One way or another." "Jack, no." But he was gone, melting into the darkness with the skill of a man who'd spent years learning to move unseen. Sarah gripped the pistol, her heart hammering as she listened to the night sounds, the roar of fire, the crack of burning wood. And then, terrifyingly, gunshots. Time stretched like molten glass. She heard shouts, more gunshots, the sound of horses fleeing, then silence except for the fire's hungry voice. When the cellar door finally opened, she nearly shot before recognizing Jack's silhouette. He was breathing hard, soot-streaked, with blood on his shirt. "You're hurt." "Not mine," he said shortly. Tom's boys weren't expecting someone who could shoot back in the dark. They're gone. Tom's nursing a bullet in his shoulder. "Did you? Is he alive?" "Wanted to kill him, but..." He slumped against the cellar wall. "Couldn't make you a widow the same night I made you homeless." They stayed in the cellar until dawn, watching their life burn to ash. When the sun finally rose, it illuminated devastation. The cabin was gone, along with everything they couldn't grab: Sarah's quilts, Jack's books, the furniture he'd built with patient hands. Jack emerged first, surveying the damage with hard eyes. Then he returned for Sarah, carrying her to sit on a flat rock upwind from the smoke. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I brought this on us. My temper, my past." "Stop!" Sarah grabbed his hand. "Tom Garrett brought this on us. Hate brought this on us, not you." They salvaged what they could from the root cellar, some preserved food, a few tools that had been stored there. Jack found Sarah's wheeled chair, somehow spared by virtue of being behind the cabin. One wheel was damaged but repairable. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, looking at the ruins. Jack was quiet for a long moment. "We rebuild, but first..." He looked toward town. "First, we make sure this doesn't happen again." It was Granny Wash who found them that afternoon, having seen the smoke from miles away. She took one look at the destruction and the determined set of their faces and nodded. "Load up," she said simply. "You're coming with me." "We can't," Sarah started. "Didn't ask if you could. Said you're coming. Got a place you can stay while we sort this mess out." The place turned out to be a miner's cabin Granny Wash owned down the mountain. Closer to civilization, but still private. As they settled in, she shared news that made Jack's jaw tighten. "Tom Garrett's telling everyone you attacked him. Says you went crazy. Burned your own place to frame him. Sheriff's looking for you." "Let him look," Jack said darkly. "No." Granny Wash's voice was firm. "You'll face this proper. I've already sent word to Judge Morrison. He rides circuit through here next week. Man's fair. Doesn't care for Tom's type. We'll get this sorted legal-like." The next days were tense. Jack chafed at hiding, wanting to confront their enemies directly. Sarah worked to keep him calm while dealing with her own grief over their lost home. At night, they clung to each other, finding comfort in the fact that they'd survived. "I keep thinking about my quilts," Sarah said one evening. "Silly, I know. When we could have died, but they were proof I could still create beautiful things." "You'll make more," Jack promised. "Better ones. I'll build you a bigger frame, a proper sewing corner. You'll build us a stronger house." She corrected. "One that can't burn so easily." The day Judge Morrison arrived, half the town came to watch. The impromptu trial was held in the largest saloon, cleared of gaming tables for the occasion. Tom Garrett sat with his arm in a sling, surrounded by supporters. Jack and Sarah faced them across the room, Granny Wash beside them like a protective angel. "This is simple," Tom began when called to speak. "Thornton's always been unstable. Ask anyone. He attacked me once before, unprovoked. Now he's done it again, and burned his own cabin to cover it up." "Why would I burn my own home?" Jack asked, his voice cutting through the murmur of crowd. "Because you're crazy," Tom sputtered. "Everyone knows." "What everyone knows." Judge Morrison interrupted. "Is that you've been causing trouble since you were knee-high? Now, I'll have order and facts, not opinions. Who saw the fire start? One by one, witnesses came forward. Most hadn't seen anything definitive. Then a surprise. Pete Dawson, one of Tom's own companions from that first day, stepped up. 'I can't do this anymore,' Pete said, not meeting Tom's furious gaze. 'Tom planned it. Said we'd smoke them out, grab the woman while Thornton was dealing with the fire. Only it went wrong. Fire spread too fast, and Thornton came after us like a ghost. Tom's lucky he only got a bullet in the shoulder.' The courtroom erupted. Tom lunged at Pete but was restrained. Judge Morrison banged his gavel repeatedly. "Order. Mr. Garrett, you're under arrest for arson and attempted kidnapping. Sheriff, do your duty." As Tom was dragged out, still cursing, Judge Morrison turned to Jack and Sarah. "Mr. and Mrs. Thornton, you have the court's apologies for what you've endured. Mr. Garrett will serve time for his crimes. Moreover, he'll pay restitution for your losses." "We don't want his money," Jack said firmly. "Then donate it to charity. But the law requires restitution." The judge's eyes were kind as he looked at Sarah. "Ma'am, I hope you won't judge our entire community by the actions of a few fools. I've learned to judge people individually." Sarah replied, "Some have shown cruelty. Others, like Mrs. Washington here, have shown great kindness." After the trial, several townspeople approached them. A carpenter offered help rebuilding. The general store owner extended credit. Women who'd previously ignored Sarah nodded respectfully. It wasn't a complete transformation, but it was a beginning. That night, in Granny Wash's borrowed cabin, Jack was unusually quiet. "What's troubling you?" Sarah asked. "We won. Tom's going to prison." "Didn't protect you," he said roughly. "Didn't keep you safe." "You did, though. We're here, aren't we? Alive and together? Your parents were right. I can't give you the life you deserve. Look what my presence has brought. Jack Thornton, you stop that right now." Sarah's voice was sharp. "My presence brought Tom Garrett's attention. Your presence kept me safe from it. We protected each other. That's what partners do." He looked at her for a long moment. then pulled her close. How'd I get so lucky? Lucky? She laughed, but it was watery. We just lost everything. Not everything. He kissed her forehead. Not even close to everything. 2 days later, they stood on the site of their former home. The ashes had cooled, and Jack had cleared the worst of the debris. Sarah sat in her chair, studying the land with new eyes. We'll build with stone this time, she said. Harder, but fireproof. We? Jack raised an eyebrow. I can mix mortar, sort stones. Don't underestimate me. Never have, he said seriously. Never will, as they planned their new home. Sarah felt something she hadn't expected. Hope. They'd been tested by fire, literally, and survived. Their love had proven stronger than hate, their partnership more enduring than prejudice. It'll be hard, Jack warned. Starting over. Could take years to have what we had. Then we'd better get started, Sarah said practically. Hand me that stick. I want to mark where the kitchen garden will go. Jack laughed, the sound rich and unexpected after the dark days. Yes, ma'am. Whatever you say, ma'am. That's more like it, she said primly. But she was smiling. The sun climbed higher, warming the mountain air. Below, the town went about its business, forever changed by recent events. And on the hillside, two people who'd found each other against all odds began again, building not just a home, but a future, one stone at a time. The summer of 1864 brought unexpected allies to their mountainside. Word of the trial and Tom Garrett's imprisonment had spread through the territory, carrying with it the story of the mountain man and his wheelchair-bound wife who'd stood against injustice. Some came out of curiosity, others from genuine desire to help. Sarah sat in the shade of a makeshift canvas shelter, sorting stones by size while Jack and 3 volunteers worked on the foundation of their new home. Her hands were rough now from months of labor, but she wore the calluses with pride. Each stone she touched would become part of their fortress against the world. Mrs. Thornton, called Matthew Carson, the young carpenter from town. Where did you want the main window facing? East, she answered without hesitation. I want to see the sunrise. Jack paused in his work to smile at her. They'd learned to find joy in small choices. Window placement, door height, the angle of the roof. Each decision was a small act of defiance against those who'd tried to break them. Among their helpers was someone unexpected, Peter Dawson, the man whose testimony had sent Tom Garrett to prison. He'd arrived one morning with tools and a stammered apology, asking if he could help rebuild what he'd helped destroy. Why? Jack had asked bluntly. Pete had looked at his boots. Can't sleep right, knowing what I was part of. Figure the only way to make amends is with my hands. Jack had handed him a shovel without another word. Redemption, they'd both learned, was built one action at a time. The stone house rose slowly but steadily. It was smaller than planned. Stone took more time and effort than wood. But every wall was solid, every corner true. Jack built wider doorways and lower shelves, designing the space around Sarah's needs without making it feel like accommodation. One evening, as they sat by their cooking fire watching the walls grow taller, Sarah said, "We should thank them, all of them, properly." How? Jack was not a man given to social gestures. A gathering. When the house is done, music, food, dancing. Dancing? He raised an eyebrow. She laughed. Others can dance. I'll provide the music. She'd discovered an old fiddle in Granny Wash's belongings and had been practicing, her fingers remembering lessons from childhood. Never thought I'd host a party, Jack mused. Never thought you'd have a wife either. Sarah pointed out. Life's full of surprises. The house was completed just as the first golden leaves appeared on the aspens. It wasn't large, 2 rooms instead of 1, with a proper iron stove Jack had ordered from Denver. But the walls were stone 2 feet thick, the roof was slate instead of wood shingles, and the door was reinforced with iron bands. It's a fortress, Matthew Carson said admiringly. It's a home, Sarah corrected, though she understood his meaning. They'd built for permanence this time, for a life that couldn't be easily destroyed by hatred or fire. The celebration happened on a clear September evening. Granny Wash had spread the word, and more people came than Jack had expected, or was entirely comfortable with. But he endured it for Sarah, who glowed with happiness as she played her fiddle, filling the mountain air with music. They'd set up outside, lanterns hanging from trees and tables made from sawhorses and planks. The food was simple but plentiful: venison stew, cornbread, wild berry pies. Someone had brought corn whiskey, though Jack limited himself to a single cup. Old habits of vigilance died hard. "Play Red River Valley," someone called out, and Sarah obliged, her fingers flying over the strings. From her chair on the improvised platform Jack had built, she could see the whole gathering: townspeople who'd once scorned her, miners who'd heard her story, and friends like Granny Wash who'd stood by them through everything. During a break in the music, Mayor Williams approached. He was a portly man who'd stayed carefully neutral during their troubles, but now he cleared his throat officially. "Mrs. Thornton, Mr. Thornton, I want to apologize on behalf of Cedar Ridge. What happened to you, what some of our citizens did, was shameful. What's done is done," Jack said shortly. "Perhaps, but I hope you'll consider being part of our community going forward. We could use folks of your caliber." Sarah laid a hand on Jack's arm before he could refuse outright. "We'll think about it. Mayor, thank you." As the evening wore on, Sarah noticed a young woman sitting apart from the others, watching with hungry eyes. She recognized that look, the yearning of someone who felt outside of life, looking in. "The girl by the oak tree," she murmured to Jack. "Bring her here." Jack followed her gaze and nodded. A few minutes later, he returned with the girl, hardly more than 16, with a twisted foot that made her gait uneven. "This is Mary Fletcher," Jack said. "Her folks have a claim upstream." "I'm sorry," Mary stammered. "I didn't mean to stare. It's just, I've heard about you, Mrs. Thornton, how you still—" She gestured helplessly. Sarah reached out and took the girl's hands. "I know," she said simply. "Sit with me. Would you like to learn to play fiddle?" Mary's face lit up like sunrise. "Could I, even with—" She gestured at her foot. "Music doesn't care about our legs," Sarah said firmly. "Only our hearts and hands." As Sarah showed Mary how to hold the fiddle, Jack watched with soft eyes. This, he realized, was what they were building. Not just a stone house, but a place where broken people could find wholeness, where differences were strengths, where love could grow in the rockiest soil. The party lasted until late, voices and laughter echoing off the mountains. When the last guest had gone, Jack carried Sarah into their new home. Over the threshold he'd made extra wide and smooth. "Welcome home, Mrs. Thornton," he said, setting her gently in the chair he'd built specifically for their new space. "Home," she repeated, looking around at the stone walls, the iron stove, the windows that faced the sunrise. "Jack, do you remember what you said that first night, about seeing my true beauty?" "Remember every word," he said, kneeling beside her chair. "I didn't believe you then. Thought it was pity or kindness or—" She touched his face. "But you really did see me, didn't you? The person I could become, not just what I'd lost." "Saw a woman with steel in her spine and fire in her heart," he said. "Saw someone worth fighting for, worth building with. Still see her. And I saw a man who'd convinced himself he was better off alone." Sarah replied, "Saw someone who needed to be reminded that gentleness isn't weakness, that letting people in isn't surrender. We made each other whole," Jack said wonderingly. "No," Sarah shook her head. "We were always whole. We just helped each other remember it." That night, in their bed that no longer creaked with temporary construction but stood solid on a stone floor, they held each other and listened to the night sounds: an owl calling, wind through pines, the distant howl of wolves that no longer seemed threatening but simply part of the world they'd claimed. "What now?" Jack asked into the darkness. "We've built our fortress, faced down our enemies. What comes next? Life, Sarah said simply. Ordinary, beautiful life. I'll teach Mary Fletcher to play fiddle. You'll hunt and trap and maybe take on some carpentry work in town. We'll grow our garden, improve our home, welcome the few and send away the cruel. Ordinary, Jack repeated, and she heard the smile in his voice. Don't think anything about us will ever be ordinary. Extraordinary ordinary, then, she amended. The kind of life people don't expect from a mountain hermit and a woman who can't walk. Let them not expect it, Jack said. We'll be too busy living it to care. As if in agreement, a wolf howled again. Closer this time. Once, it would have been a sound of danger, of wilderness threatening civilization. Now it was simply neighbor calling to neighbor across the vast darkness, each claiming their piece of the world, each belonging exactly where they were. Sarah smiled against Jack's shoulder, thinking of the quilts she'd make in this new home, bright with the colors of mountain wildflowers. Thinking of the songs she'd teach Mary Fletcher, of the gatherings they'd host, of the quiet evenings by their fireproof stone hearth. Thinking of all the ways love could grow when planted in ground everyone else thought barren. Outside, the September moon rose full and bright, painting their stone walls silver. Inside, two people who'd been given to each other as a cruel joke settled into sleep, wrapped in the warmth of a love that had transformed mockery into miracle, survival into joy, and two broken souls into one unbreakable whole. The mountains stood eternal around them, witness to what human cruelty had tried to destroy and human courage had chosen to build instead. And in that choice, to build rather than break, to love rather than hate, to stay rather than flee, lay the true beauty that Jack had seen from the beginning, not despite the brokenness, but because of how it had been transformed into strength. They'd given a mountain man a paralyzed woman as a joke, but the joke, in the end, was on those who couldn't see that sometimes the greatest gifts come in the strangest packages, and that true beauty has nothing to do with wholeness of body and everything to do with wholeness of heart. In their stone house on the mountain, safe from fire and hate alike, Jack and Sarah Thornton slept the sleep of the victorious, not because they'd defeated their enemies, but because they'd refused to let their enemies define them, and that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all. Thank you for listening to this story from the Wild West. Where are you listening from? Please comment below and let's connect with fellow listeners around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Jack and Sarah's journey. What touched your heart the most?